You're not welcome on this trip." My stepmother Diane said it loud enough for the entire room to hear. No context, no cushioning. Just the words, hurled across the polished kitchen like a slap. She stood there in crisp white linen, one manicured hand resting on the marble island, as if she were posing for a catalog. Her expression didn't even flicker. I was pouring coffee when she said it. My hand didn't shake, my voice didn't rise. I just looked up, met her eyes, and said, "Okay." Then I took a calm, deliberate sip, like her venom hadn't touched me at all. You'd think she'd feel some kind of shame. But no. Diane was the kind of woman who mistook elegance for superiority and cruelty for candor. Her voice was syrupy and cold as she continued, "It's just not appropriate anymore, Rachel. You know that. This is a family trip." I nearly laughed. The idea that I wasn't family in my own father's house was almost impressive in its delusion. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself or point out the fact that the lakeside villa had originally been my mother's idea, her dream before she passed, something she'd saved for, planned for, long before Diane ever entered the picture. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and walked calmly toward the patio, the early light streaking across the hardwood floors. I could feel Diane watching me, waiting for a reaction she'd never get. She lived for scenes, for conflict she could later rewrite in her favor. I gave her nothing. "Hi, Dad," I said once I was outside, my voice light but clear. "You've still got the booking confirmation for the lake house, right? Good. I need you to cancel it. Just cancel the whole thing." There was a pause on the line. I could hear him shifting uncomfortably in his leather chair, probably glancing at Diane through the glass doors. "Rachel, is this really necessary?" "Let them figure it out," I said softly, looking out at the still water beyond our yard. "Let's see what happens when they show up and nothing's there. You can always rebook later." He sighed, heavy and worn. "I don't want trouble between you two." "There's no trouble," I said. "There's just clarity." I hung up before he could say more, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. When I turned around, Diane was standing by the glass, lips pressed into a thin, smug smile. I smiled back. She didn't know what I'd just done. She wouldn't find out until they pulled up to the villa a few days from now, expecting luxury, and found nothing but locked gates and confusion. She'd think it was a clerical error, a system glitch, something to scold an assistant over. And I'd be there first, already unpacked, glass of wine in hand, waiting on the balcony, with a breathtaking view of the lake. But that part of the story wasn't for today. Today was just about saying okay in the face of another attempt to erase me. Let her think she'd won. Let her bask in it. There's something powerful in not reacting, something Diane never learned. She wielded drama like a blade. I preferred silence. It cut deeper in the long run. As I walked back inside, she tilted her head, studying me with faint suspicion. She was too proud to ask what I'd been doing on the phone, too certain I had nowhere else to go. "Don't take it personally," she said, feigning warmth as she reached for her tea. "It's just logistics, you understand." I gave her a smile that didn't touch my eyes. "Oh, I understand perfectly." I let that hang in the air as I stepped out of the kitchen. She didn't follow. Not yet. But she would. She always did. You ever watch someone underestimate you so completely that you almost feel bad for them? I waited until the sun began curling across the edge of my windowsill before I dialed again. This time, it wasn't a reaction, it was strategy. I'd already dressed. Crisp navy slacks, soft cream blouse, gold hoops, intentional choices, subtle reminders that I was still composed, still polished, still Rachel. Dad picked up on the second ring, his voice cautious, like he already knew this wasn't a casual morning call. "Hey, kiddo, that word used to comfort me." Today it just sounded tired. "I need you to do something," I said gently. "I need you to cancel the villa booking. All of it." A pause, then a soft intake of breath. "Rachel, it's not a punishment, Dad. It's a reset." He exhaled like someone bracing himself. "You know how she is. Diane gets impulsive, emotional." She didn't mean it like that. I let that hang for a second, then said, She told me to my face I wasn't welcome. There's no nuance there. He was quiet. I imagined him at his desk, that old mahogany thing with the brass drawer handles. He never changed. Probably twisting his pen in his fingers, staring out the window like he always did when a conversation got too close. "I don't want to get in the middle," he said finally. His voice softening like that would make it better. "She's under a lot of pressure lately with her brother's estate and the guest list." "Dad," I said, calm but firm, "if she wanted to host this trip on her own terms, she could have paid for it. But she didn't. You did. You always do." He didn't deny it, just sighed again, a little heavier. "I don't want a war in the family, Rachel." I leaned against the counter, looking out at the oak trees lining my driveway. Leaves rustled, gold and green. Everything looked peaceful from a distance. "There won't be a war," I said softly. "Just a little confusion. They'll show up and realize things don't run without some kind of coordination. Maybe they'll learn how to book a reservation on their own for once." A weak chuckle escaped him, which told me I still had a sliver of space with him, even now. "Cancel the house, Dad," I said again. "Please. I already paid the deposit. I'll cover it. Send me the invoice." He didn't answer right away, but when he finally did, I heard something shift in his voice. Maybe it was guilt, maybe just exhaustion, but he said, "All right, I'll call the property manager this morning. Thank you." "I didn't know she'd go that far," he added quietly. "She says things sometimes, but I never thought she'd say that. She says things because no one tells her not to." That landed harder than I expected. Silence stretched between us, heavy and long. "She's not your mother," he said finally. "I know," I replied, "but you are still my father." And in that moment, I think we both heard the distance between those roles. After we hung up, I sat still for a long time, not angry, not triumphant, just still. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't demanded anything. I'd asked for what I needed and gotten it, with clarity and calm. Diane would never see it coming, but she didn't need to. Not yet. Let her circle menus and finalize guest towels, and imagine herself presiding over a flawless summer gathering. Let her think silence meant surrender. I was done shouting to be heard. Now, I was just letting the quiet speak for me. And the next move? That was mine to make. The lake house was still available. That surprised me a little, though it shouldn't have. Most people didn't cancel plans last minute without some kind of chaos behind it. But when I spoke to Megan, the soft-voiced coordinator who managed the estate, she didn't ask many questions. She just pulled up the calendar, confirmed the cancellation from my father's account, and said, "You'd like to rebook under your own name?" "Yes," I said. "Same dates. Full property. No shared access." "No problem," she replied cheerfully. "We'll send over the updated contract within the hour." And just like that, the story started to shift. I spent the afternoon planning. Not a schedule, not a guest list, just intentions. There were no expectations to manage, no fragile egos to coddle, no passive-aggressive commentary lurking behind wine glasses and sun hats. Just me and the lake. The idea of that solitude, it didn't scare me the way it once might have. A few years ago, I might have still held out hope that Diane would come around, that the family could stitch itself into something resembling unity again. But this was a quiet declaration. I didn't need to belong in someone else's narrative anymore. I had my own. That night, I pulled my old leather overnight bag from the top shelf of the hall closet. It still had a faint scent of cedar and lavender from the sachets I used to stuff in the corners. I packed slowly, deliberately. Linen dresses, my favorite book of poems. That jade green swimsuit I never wore last year, because Diane had once called it a little too bold for your coloring. I packed it first. I added the soft terracotta journal my mother had gifted me years ago, still only half filled. Back when she was alive, the lake house had been her sanctuary. It wasn't always glamorous, not back then, but she loved the quiet of it. The way the wind came off the water like a secret. She used to sit on the dock at sunset, bare feet dangling, and say, "Silence tells the truth no one else wants to say out loud." I hadn't understood that then. I do now. By the time the confirmation email hit my inbox, I already had a list. Favorite tea, a playlist that matched the rhythm of lapping waves, a set of novels that didn't ask anything of me but presence. This trip wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't even about teaching Diane a lesson yet. It was about reminding myself that I didn't need to be invited to enjoy something I helped build. Let them scramble. Let them arrive with coolers full of curated cheese and self-importance. Let them call the management company in confusion, irritation, even indignation. I wouldn't raise my voice. I had already raised my standards. The car was scheduled. The fridge at the villa would be stocked to my preferences. Megan confirmed that the caretaker had instructions to prepare the dock chairs and light the patio lanterns before dusk on the first evening. It would be quiet, peaceful, entirely mine, for now. The gravel crunched under tires before I ever saw the car. I was on the back veranda, barefoot, holding a mug of chamomile tea. The air was early morning crisp, the kind of clean that only exists near water. I had just opened the doors to let in the breeze when I heard it, the slow, deliberate spin of rubber against stone. Too heavy to be delivery, too slow for staff. I knew that sound. Diane's SUV. I didn't move. A few minutes passed before voices floated through the trees. Diane's unmistakable cadence, brisk and irritated, followed by the soft, overly polite tones of her entourage. I recognized one of them as her sister-in-law, the one who always brought gluten-free biscotti and acted like it was some sort of social currency. I stayed by the French doors and took another sip of tea. Then came the front door. Sharp knocks, quick succession, then a pause, then more knocking, this time with that heavy, entitled rhythm Diane used when she was certain someone was in the wrong. I took my time walking around the side of the house, through the hallway lined with framed photos, Mom in her gardening gloves, me at 10 holding a trout, Dad on the porch in his Red Sox hat. None of them featured Diane. By the time I opened the front door, her sunglasses were already off. Her mouth poised to speak. She froze. Oh, that one syllable hung in the air like a loose thread, waiting to be pulled. I gave her the gentlest smile I could muster. "Hi, Diane. You're early." She blinked, looked past me into the entryway, then down at her phone, as if she'd missed a group message. "We had the house this weekend," she said finally, her voice faltering for the first time since I'd known her. Richard confirmed it. I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. "You must have missed the cancellation notice. I rebooked it, after you uninvited me." Her brows lifted like she hadn't expected that much honesty in one sentence. From behind her, two women hovered awkwardly with weekend bags. One of them whispered something to the other. A small part of me felt for them, trapped in a front row seat they hadn't bought tickets for. "You rebooked it," Diane repeated, as if trying to find some part of the phrase that made sense. "I did. But how? Why would you?" "I thought I'd enjoy some quiet," I said lightly, "since you made it clear I wasn't part of the family plan." She stared at me, trying to gauge if this was retaliation or insanity. I offered her neither. "I don't want to ruin your weekend," I continued. "You're welcome to stay. There's plenty of room." "I'm sure we can share." I watched her face contort, just slightly. Sharing wasn't her language. She liked clear hierarchies, carefully managed optics, a power structure she could control. But saying no would be messier than staying, especially in front of her guests. "Of course," she said finally, pasting on a brittle smile. "It's just such a surprise. But if you insist." I stepped back fully and let them pass. The other women glanced at me as they entered, a mixture of curiosity and something softer, maybe quiet respect. Once the door closed behind them, Diane turned. "You've changed." "I've grown," I said simply, and with that, I picked up my mug and returned to the veranda, the lake still calm, waiting. Behind me, Diane's designer heels clicked against the slate tile. I could hear her tone shift, false cheer, high notes of hospitality, directing her guests to their rooms like nothing was out of place. But something was. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control of the story. Diane was a vision of diplomacy that first evening. She floated through the villa with that performative poise of someone born to host, but not born to serve. She offered wine, approved music, complimented throw pillows she had once mocked as too eclectic when I first chose them. To an outsider, she looked warm, generous, accommodating. If I hadn't lived through her barbed passive aggression for the last 10 years, I might have believed it too. But I knew the difference between civility and strategy. She was adjusting, not to the house. She knew the floor plan like any of us. She was adjusting to me, this version of me. The Rachel who didn't react, who had keys, who had contracts. Her guests, bless them, were too tired from the drive to notice the tension braided into the floral arrangements. They'd unpacked, explored the property, marveled at the lakeside view, as if they hadn't just been witness to a silent, unscheduled power shift. Diane followed behind them, with the cadence of a woman trying to reassert a role she hadn't realized she'd lost. Later, after the sun dropped behind the trees and the conversation lulled, she found me alone in the library room, if you could call it that. It was my mother's reading nook once, a quiet alcove lined with second-hand shelves and soft wool blankets. Diane had tried to convert it into a wine bar years ago, but Dad pushed back. Mom's chair was still there. I kept it on purpose. "Rachel," she said, appearing in the doorway with her polite smile firmly in place. "Would you give me a tour?" I looked up from the book I wasn't really reading. She didn't need a tour. She'd visited a dozen times. But I knew what this was. She wanted context. She wanted to see what I had touched, what I now claimed. I stood and nodded. Of course. We walked slowly through the villa, just the two of us. My steps were easy. Hers were deliberate. At the entrance to the master suite, I paused. "This room's been redone," I said. I picked out the fabric for the drapes. Took months to source something that matched the original beams. She scanned the space with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Very tasteful. I led her past the guest rooms. These were updated last spring. We brought in local craftsmen to build the bed frames. They're all handmade. She glanced at the embroidered labels stitched onto the linens. "You had custom sheets?" "Only for the main house," I said with a soft smile. "The guest house still uses the standard set." Her silence was brief, but telling. Downstairs, we stepped into the open kitchen. The countertops gleamed, stone quarried from a nearby town. The stools were newer, sleek walnut with brass detail. I ran my fingers lightly along the edge of one. "I chose these," I said simply. "The last set didn't hold up, and I wanted something that reflected the architecture better." Diane gave a short, polite nod. "You've done a lot." "I have," I said. "I also handled the contracts last quarter. Taxes too. And I meet with the property manager once a month." That one landed. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. "So, you really manage all of this now?" "Not just manage," I said. "Own. Legally. It was transferred last year." I let her sit with that. She turned toward the window, staring out at the dock where the lights were beginning to flicker on automatically. Another update I'd added last fall. Her reflection hovered beside mine in the glass. Two women, one holding the space, the other realizing she no longer could. "You've really made it yours," she said after a long moment. "No," I replied gently. "I've just protected what was always mine." And I didn't say it with bitterness. I said it with peace. She turned toward me then, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look irritated or superior or threatened. She looked smaller, maybe a little tired. "Thank you," she said finally, quietly, "for letting us stay." I nodded. "Of course." And as we walked back into the main room, her heels softer now, her shoulders less square, I realized something. You don't have to yell to reclaim space. You just have to hold it, without apology. The apology came the next morning, quiet and unannounced, like rain tapping on windows before you even register clouds. Diane found me in the garden, where the rosemary and sage had grown wild after a week of late spring sun. I was trimming the edges of a planter box, dirt under my nails, hair pulled into a low bun. The kind of messy contentment that comes when your thoughts aren't being constantly interrupted. She didn't knock on the glass or call out first. just walked onto the patio with her sunglasses tucked into her neckline and something unreadable in her posture. I didn't say anything, just kept snipping. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. I set the shears down and brushed my hands off on my apron. For which part? That caught her slightly off guard. Her jaw twitched, then relaxed. For saying what I said. That you weren't welcome? She folded her arms and looked out toward the water. I was under a lot of pressure with the trip and everything else going on, and I let it get to me. I gave a small nod. "That's unfortunate." She turned to look at me again. I didn't mean it. I was upset, but I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I almost believed her, not because her tone was particularly sincere, but because I could see for once that she wanted something, an easing of the discomfort, not forgiveness. Not warmth, just equilibrium, control. "I accept your apology," I said after a moment, "but I won't forget it." That quieted her again. She nodded slowly, then offered a thin smile, the kind people wear when they're trying to stitch something back together with fraying thread. Later that evening, as twilight spread across the lake in hues of pink and gold, we hosted the formal dinner. The long table was set on the grand balcony that overlooked the water, draped in linen and candlelight, the silver polished to perfection. The meal had been catered, Diane's idea, and the menu was her usual blend of restraint and trend: grilled halibut, heirloom vegetables, a lemon tart too delicate to touch. Everyone was already 2 glasses in when I stood to offer a brief toast. It wasn't elaborate, just a moment to acknowledge being together, the history of the villa, and what it meant to gather under one roof again. I didn't script it, I just spoke from the heart. "My mother believed that homes held memory," I said, holding my glass lightly. "She always said that places remember the hands that built them, the voices that filled them, and that when you return to those places, they greet you like an old friend." Smiles, soft nods. Even Diane, sitting at the far end with her wineglass resting like a shield against her chest, gave a slight smile. I raised my glass. "To memory," I said, "and to choosing, every time, to return with intention." But before glasses could clink, Diane's voice broke in, sharp, casual, calculated. "Well," she said with a dry laugh, "some of us didn't have to build anything. They just inherited it. Must be nice to earn things the easy way." The air thinned. Laughter tried to follow, but it came out awkward, thin, nervous. Someone cleared their throat. I didn't flinch, I didn't look at her. I just set my glass down gently and smiled at the table. The tension slithered across the table like a spilled glass of wine no one wanted to mop up. She had done it, again. And the difference now was, no one was laughing with her. No one came to her defense. The night didn't end in flames, but a fault line had been drawn, and this time, everyone felt the tremor. I waited. I let the awkward hum settle first. Let the guests squirm in their seats, unsure if they should sip their wine or look away, or try to patch the silence with some light-hearted joke. I didn't rescue them, or Diane. I wanted everyone to feel it. Then, slowly, with all the unbothered calm I could summon, I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point. I simply reached for the guest registry folder I'd set aside earlier, still tucked beneath my linen napkin. It wasn't flashy, just a simple binder, navy blue, the kind the property management company used to keep track of all villa records. Inside were neatly printed pages, each one time-stamped, notarized, and bearing the villa's official crest. I opened it like it was any other casual document, the same way someone might flip through a family photo album or a dinner menu. "This," I said, holding it gently in one hand, "is the villa's legal registry. Full documentation of ownership transfers, bookings, and financial contributions since the property was acquired." Quote, Diane blinked, slowly, as if her brain couldn't quite catch up to the words forming in the air around her. I continued, my tone even. "My name appears on every contract," I said. "Every mortgage statement, every maintenance agreement, every staffing budget." I flipped to a bookmarked page. Diane's name, however. I paused, letting the silence make the point for me. has never appeared once. Not for a single payment, not for a single trip, not for a single night. Someone at the table, perhaps one of her friends, shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Another took a slow sip of water. The silence wasn't confused now, it was clarity. Sharp, undeniable clarity. "She's enjoyed the lake house," I added, still calm, extensively, but as a guest, not a contributor. I turned the page. For those curious, yes, I do cover the villa's annual costs now. Fully. My father transferred full ownership to me last spring. And for anyone wondering if that was generous or transactional, I looked directly at Diane. It was earned, quietly, over years of planning, managing, and preserving this space, while others simply arrived with a suitcase and an attitude. A breath. No one moved. Then I smiled, light, almost amused. Which makes Diane's earlier comment about how some people just inherit things. I tilted my head. Well, ironic at best. I gently closed the folder and set it on the table beside me. "I'd like to propose a new toast," I said, raising my glass once more, "to contribution over commentary, and to the quiet work that makes these moments possible." This time the clinks came immediately, crisp and firm. No awkwardness. Diane didn't toast. Her hand stayed clenched around the stem of her glass, knuckles pale, eyes locked on some invisible point past the candlelight. She didn't speak. Because what could she say? The table had shifted, and she hadn't felt it move until it was already gone. The moment dinner ended, Diane tried to rewind the evening like it was a scene gone slightly off script. She caught me near the hallway as the guests filtered into the lounge for dessert, where soft jazz and low laughter floated under the amber light of vintage sconces. Her voice was honeyed now, threaded with feigned amusement, as though she were just clearing up a little misunderstanding. "Rachel?" she said, lightly touching my arm like we were old friends sharing a harmless inside joke. "You know, I was just being playful out there." I turned to her slowly, gently pulling my arm away. "Playful," I repeated, letting the word land between us like a dropped spoon. She gave a short laugh. "Oh, come on. Everyone knew I was teasing. I mean, you're doing so well for yourself. I just thought a little ribbing would lighten the mood." I tilted my head. "You interrupted a toast about my mother, about memory and family legacy, to make a joke about me having it easy." Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't expected me to name it so plainly. "I didn't think it would come across that way," she said, smoothing her blouse. "You've always had such a composed exterior. Sometimes I forget you actually take things to heart." My smile was polite, razor thin. "That's the problem, Diane. You think grace is the same as passivity. That calm means permission." She stiffened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. All I had to do was let the truth speak without apology. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of the staff, normally efficient and invisible, now clustered near the kitchen entrance. Carlos, the head houseman, gave me a small nod. He had seen the moment earlier. They all had, and they were already responding. While Diane continued trying to explain herself with increasingly breathless charm, I noticed something subtle but telling. No one brought her the espresso she'd requested 10 minutes earlier. No one refilled her glass. She wasn't being ignored intentionally. Not yet. But something had shifted. The staff had taken their cues, not from her voice, but from the center of gravity in the room. And that wasn't her anymore. One of Diane's friends stepped into the hallway behind her, glanced between us and said awkwardly, "We're going to head to bed soon. Thank you, Rachel, for everything. The dinner was perfect." She gave me a small, sincere smile, then looked briefly at Diane and added, more hesitantly, "We'll see you in the morning." When the door clicked shut behind her, Diane exhaled through her nose, her control unraveling by quiet degrees. "Look," she said, the softness vanishing now. "I know you've been feeling like an outsider in this family since everything changed. But this was supposed to be a peaceful weekend. Then you should have let it be one." I didn't blink. "You said what you said. I responded with facts. You don't get to call it drama just because it didn't play out your way. Her cheeks flushed, mouth twitching like she wanted to say something cruel, but couldn't find the angle. In the silence that followed, I reached for the small stack of dessert menus and handed them to a passing staff member with a quiet, "Thank you." And just like that, the moment ended. No explosion, no grand confrontation, just a slow, irreversible unraveling of her authority. Sometimes the most damning judgment comes not from outrage, but from absence. And Diane was starting to notice just how quiet the room had gotten around her. The morning after the dinner, the house was unnaturally quiet, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from avoidance. From tension too thick to cut with casual pleasantries. Diane stayed in her room. I knew because her heels hadn't clicked once across the stone floor all morning, and she was never the type to go unnoticed. Not by choice. Downstairs, I found Alan, the villa manager, at the staff entry by the back garden, going over the week's invoices. His silver hair was damp from the mist, his clipboard neatly organized like always. "Alan," I said softly, "do you have a few minutes?" He looked up, nodding immediately. "Of course." We stepped into the study, the one my mother had used as her retreat. It still held the faint scent of sandalwood and lemon oil. I closed the door behind us. "I'd like to make a small update regarding future access," I said, pulling a folded document from the drawer. "Effective immediately, Diane Whitmore is no longer to be included in family bookings unless I personally authorize it." He didn't blink, just glanced down at the document, then back at me. "You want me to remove her from the guest list database?" "Yes," I said. "And, to be clear, this isn't temporary. If she books under someone else's name or tries to arrive as part of another party, I expect to be notified." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Alan had worked this property for 15 years. He knew the fault lines better than anyone, and yesterday's dinner had told him everything he needed to know. As I left the study, I saw Carlos lingering by the front staircase. His eyes met mine. No questions, just silent confirmation. The house was watching. Later that day, Diane appeared in the main foyer. Her suitcase stood upright by the door, her cardigan folded neatly over the handle. Her sunglasses were already on, though the sun outside was still shrouded in late-morning clouds. "I thought I'd leave early," she said, without a hint of irony, as if the decision had been entirely hers. "I have things to tend to back in the city." Of course she did. The kind of things that were easier to tend to than discomfort. I walked over and stood across from her, just inside the wide, arched entry. "I won't keep you," I said. She hesitated, as if expecting some gesture of reconciliation, a reach for civility, a plea. None came. Instead, I reached for the envelope sitting on the console table and handed it to her. She glanced at it, frowning. "What's this?" "Formal notice," I said. "You won't be on future guest lists. This property won't be available to you going forward. Not through Dad, not through any family member." Her lips parted slightly. "Are you serious?" "Completely." She let out a dry laugh, the kind that tried to mask insult with amusement. "So that's it? You're excommunicating me now?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm simply closing the door you've been slamming shut for years and pretending you weren't." She stared at me, struggling to gather a response that could pierce the calm in my voice. Then I said the words I had rehearsed, the ones that had waited years for the right moment. "Some people mistake silence for permission," I said softly. "But eventually, silence becomes a goodbye." Her expression faltered. The edge in her spine softened, like she suddenly understood something she'd never bothered to see. This wasn't a performance. This was final. She gave a short nod, not of understanding, not of agreement, but of defeat. The kind that comes when you realize the room has changed, and you're no longer welcome in it. She wheeled her suitcase toward the door, didn't look back, and I didn't watch her leave. I turned toward the window, toward the lake, where the breeze had picked up just slightly, making ripples across the surface. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary, and in its own way, merciful, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is tell someone, "The way you treated me was never okay." and you won't get the chance to do it again. Would you have let her stay, or would you have drawn the line, once and for all? This wasn't revenge, it was resolution. And this time, it was mine. If you've ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, only to realize your silence was being mistaken for weakness, then you know exactly how Rachel felt. So tell me, have you ever had to reclaim your space, your voice, your worth? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you felt this moment deep in your chest, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter. And don't forget to subscribe for more first-person stories about women who stop shrinking and start standing tall. Because grace isn't weakness, and goodbye can be the most powerful word you ever say.